Okay, we're live now. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this first episode of the Breakaway Podcast. This is a new initiative from the Referendum Party where we want to communicate with you on a bi-weekly basis, news from the Cape and news from the Referendum Party, the campaigns, the ideas, the operations we're running as we continue the fight towards Cape independence and upcoming elections taking place in 2026 and 2029. I'm joined today with my co-host, Yusuf, who's a co-founder of the Referendum Party alongside me. And we have a special guest this evening, Rob Dygan of the Cape Independent newspaper. If you haven't read it, they've got amazing content from lots of great thinkers from the Western Cape, and they cover a lot of those stories that the traditional media outlets like News 24 try and avoid often. So tonight we're going to be talking about a very, very divisive topic now that's emerged in the Western Cape. I think it's the most backlash I've ever seen the DA face. Certainly in my involvement in the Cape independence movement, I've never seen something as heated as this. And this is the rates increases that are taking place in Cape Town. The City of Cape Town, run by the DA, has announced their new budget for the 2025 to 2026 year, and it is leading to massive increases in costs for Cape Town residents. Property taxes are set to go up by 8%, but depending on your property evaluation, the increases may vary to up to 25% based on new levies that are being implemented, such as cleaning levies, new electricity charges. So it's a massive, massive increase for a lot of middle class ratepayers in Cape Town. This is way above the inflation rate, it's way above the GDP growth rate. And for many people, it's simply pricing them out of the city. So I will collect some more data on that and I'll bring that back to you in a minute. But Yusuf or Rob, do you have anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, maybe I could touch off first if you don't mind. Yeah, so this rate hike is a massive one. Like, as you said, for middle income and higher households, it can go up to 25% or even near 30% in certain brackets. And the thing is that the city of Cape Town has been cumulatively increasing rates, especially since the 2010s, around then, above the inflation rate. So per household already, we pay some of the highest in the country. I think the highest actually, because the value of property in Cape Town is obviously much higher than in Pretoria or wherever. So yeah, it's a lot of money that we are spending, giving out. And as everyone knows, the economic situation in South Africa is really difficult. So it's effectively like another tax. We pay tax to the national government for basically nothing. Then we pay our private tax. As middle income people, you often have to get your own private medical aid. You have to often pay an extra fee for your kids in the school, private security, etc. So that's like the real tax. And then on top of these rates as well, which are starting to be really, really big. I saw an estimate that for certain low income households, it can be up to 17% of someone's income. We're talking thousands of rands every year. And big question then is where's this money going in, and what services do we get out of it? Because as a Cape Townian or even someone from the Western Cape, life hasn't gotten drastically, amazingly better. In many senses, it has gone downhill, albeit slower than in KwaZulu-Natal or somewhere. But if I compare how things are when I was a kid in 2010 or 2011, or even a teenager in the 14s and the teen years, you see a lot more trash, you see a lot more homeless people, you see a lot more poverty on the streets, you hear about people's financial struggles. So this feels like another kick in the gut.
Absolutely. And the Willem Petzer group have come out with a incredible video going in depth into what's been taking place with these new increases, and some of the details are truly shocking. I mean, it's expected to be another £4,500 increase in rates for lower middle class income households in Cape Town. So you're talking about people there with a property in the range of about 2 million or so. They're expected to see a £4,500 increase per year in their rates. And then for higher middle class, higher middle income households with properties in £6 million range, they're expecting a 7,500 increase. Now, that's at least over 1% of someone's income, 2 or 3% of their income just in 1 year that's increasing. So it's a huge cost to so many people. And, the DA have come out with this, they're talking about how Cape Town still has the lowest rates in the country. But the problem with that argument, of course, is that Cape Town's property is the most expensive in the country. So, a property that might be worth £500,000 in Pretoria, but is worth maybe £4 million in Cape Town, there's a huge variation in the property value there. But obviously the cost of the services to those households are the same. And, the income of the person in those two households are the same. So there's huge distortions of reality that are taking place there that is unfortunate. Rob, have you got any comments on what's taken place here? I know that the rates where you are in Drakenstein have also gone up in recent years quite substantially.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a mitigating factor to Drakenstein, which is that the previous property revaluation undervalued the property somewhat. So now the recent one came as a very big shock to everyone. It's like, some people's rates are going up by 66%. But I mean, look, there's a big problem here in that clearly we're dealing with a lot of semigration, but semigration sort of like hit a hilt as well. I mean, people are starting to spill out into the outlying towns, like here in Wellington, which is, I mean, this is a place that's not even on the spatial development plans for Drakenstein. Like it's like one of the major towns in the municipality, and then we don't even exist in the spatial development plan most years, and yet our property rates are skyrocketing. Now, I think, look, it's part of a broader picture because it's not just the semigration; it's the impact of land invasions. I mean, everyone's seen these pictures, the satellite pictures, seeing the transformation. But this is part of the Cape Town actually pioneered what has now become a permanent legal framework across the country, which is the use of basically taking anyone who invades land. So they started with Monwabisi Park in 2009. When Helen Zille was in charge of Cape Town. I mean, remember, she got in hot water a couple of years later for claiming that, all of these immigrants from the Eastern Cape are a burden. Now, she's very clever. She makes one of these comments every couple of years when she thinks that, when she's worried that, the DA is looking a bit too left-wing, then she'll say something that's sort of like ambiguous and slightly potentially racist. But if you look at the actual policy she pushes, she's quite left-wing. So, what happened when she was in charge of Cape Town is she pushed. She basically relaxed. She relaxed the enforcement of property laws. So she allowed people to come and settle, and then offered them. The pilot project in 2009 in Monroe-BC Park, they basically said, well, you've invaded land illegally, but we're going to give you title deeds and we're going to give you free water and electricity and service roads and all kinds of stuff like this, right? And this becomes a model for the rest of the city. And under Musi Maimane, they pushed this province-wide, so it became a thing where they effectively decriminalized land invasions. And it's only very recently, like under Jordan Hill Lewis, that they introduced an actual policy for responding to land invasions. But even still, you can look at Hermanus, where they've had very organized land invasions, many of them organized by the Land Party, who, residents of Hermanus will remember from, long-time residents anyway, I remember from several years ago, they were, organized violent riots where they trashed, shops on the high street and burnt them down and stuff. And, the land party's members from those days were, and still are, tied to sort of property developers and speculators. So it's there's a lot of this sort of becomes a racketeering effort, and like almost universally it out, and someone who's got the enforcement capacity to extract. So when you're giving title deeds to these people, it doesn't really change the fact that you've got some kind of armed group who is coming by and collecting rent from these people. And what's on paper doesn't really mean much. So the city's not just sort of empowering sort of people to take land from either the government or from property owners. They're also empowering organized crime. And they're incentivizing it with massive handouts for infrastructure and welfare and all this kind of stuff. They're very proud. They advertise this, right? And this is the paradox, because on the one hand, they tell you to be afraid of the Swart Gevaar, and on the other hand, they feed the beast. So there's like this, and it's very paradoxical, because they'll tell you how competent they are in handling all of these things. But it's like, competent at what? What exactly are you trying to achieve here? What should happen is that you actually have a rapid response and you're proactive in dealing with land invaders, whether they're on public or private property. Because in some cases, you'll find that they'll invade some private piece of property, and then the invaders will apply to the courts for relief, forcing the government to expropriate the private. And this has happened a few times. In Cape Town, no less. So what we're really dealing with is a completely insane situation, and the DA have absolutely no will to deal with it. And the problem with this is it restricts access to land, because you're not just got a problem where you have no control over the planning or sale of land, because you've got a nice open plot of land that you could sell to a developer. Or that a developer owns that they're willing to develop, and it gets taken up, and now the investment is worth nothing. So it makes it risky to invest in anything that isn't locked down immediately. And part of the culture in the construction sector that this engenders is that you will have a large number of illegal constructions, and the DA local municipalities indulge them. Anytime someone builds illegally, they indulge them. They say, look, quickly get your site together and put as many bricks down so that we can say it's a fait accompli before any of the boxes can really be ticked. And Jordan Hill-Lewis made a show of punishing a site. It was a year or two, I think it was last year, who'd set up a residence. But the city had already connected them to water and electricity, meaning that they knew about the property, they knew it was illegally constructed. They knew that they had to have given actual tangible permission in order to connect it up to the grid. You can't do that unless you've been given permission. So the kind of behaviors that occur because they're allowing this laws to happen is that they have to commit criminal, sort of borderline criminal acts themselves. And when it comes to foreign investors, I mean, let's look at Amazon. Amazon put, before the whole public consulting period was done, they just rammed that office up at Liesbeek, and all of the attempts to stop it were moot because the thing was already there. And I mean, whenever it's important, you can definitely build. But heaven forfend some middle class person wants to redo their windows or their roof, because then they have a 2-year waiting period with a heritage commission. Like, this is the kind of stuff this is the kind of way that the DA makes you work. If you are trying to be law abiding, they choke you to death. But if you're fabulously wealthy and incontinently corrupt, or if you're poor and violent and greedy, then you can get whatever you want.
Well, I think there's a term for that. It's narco-tyranny, basically.
Quite. But it's an allegiance of the high and low versus the middle. So the middle gets squeezed, paying for everything, while the poor get mobilized in order for you to win brownie points with your cocktail buddy, and you keep trying to bribe them to vote for you. Meanwhile, you've got this high-level sort of cluster of oligarchs that you have to keep filleting so that you can keep your coffers filled. And Johan Rupert, who's one of the has had 2 monopoly projects supported by the DA. For example, he's got this vertical integration project with the telecoms industry, where he's buying up every single layer of the telecoms industry, and they're not competitive companies. These are companies that have sort of localized monopolies and are underperforming even telecom, many of them, right? Especially Vumatel, right? So he's buying up a big chunk of Vumatel. The idea is that he's going to have everything. He's going to merge this with Vodacom, and there was a big sort of competition commission thing. And the DA stamped their foot to say, you have to let him build his little monopoly, right? Once you vertically integrate an entire sort of, but that's besides the point. The other one, the monopoly that they handed him was the commission for the electrical wheeling system in Cape Town. Now, what has happened is that for several years leading up to this plan for the electrical wheeling system, where people get to sell their electricity on the market, blah, 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 all the solar panels, is they choked everyone with regulations and tariffs for years. They've been planning this for ages, right? So, I mean, it's really pernicious, because you got one guy who sits and collects a tariff for every exchange of money which comes through. And the infrastructure investment is a fraction of the amount of money he gets to hoover up once the system gets running, right? So it's a really, really lucrative investment. He gets handed this lovely monopoly, right? So this happens over and over again, because I remember the one time I actually had a face-to-face discussion with Helen Ziller. I think she could tell at the time that I was fairly naive in my.
Sorry, Rob, I think we've lost your audio there. Yeah, it's completely gone.
Well,
Okay, well, we'll wait for Rob to come back. But I think in the meantime, because it was brought up in the discussion, there's obviously in a lot of these illegal settlements that have emerged in the Western Cape, we don't exactly know what the DA's plan is there, because obviously they've done very little over the years to actually curtail this. And when they've been challenged on the topic in the past as well, the likes of Jordan Hill-Lewis have said that there's nothing they can do to stop it. Now, that isn't entirely true, and we'll get onto that later. But I mean, I don't know what the DA's plan is, Yusuf. I mean, let's just look at the voting results from places like Kailicha, where we've seen some of the biggest growths in informal settlements, illegal settlements. And you can just see it's a nightmare for the DA. I mean, in this one ward, they were able to achieve, 3% of the vote. In another ward, they were able to achieve 3.5% of the vote. So, the benefit for the DA is that a lot of people who are legally settled in Cape Town don't register to vote or don't bother to vote. So they aren't necessarily at the moment seeing that change in their electoral support. But that could change in future, and then they'd be in serious trouble. And that's the problem that's facing Cape Town, is you cannot look after the rest of South Africa. I mean, the plan from a lot of people like Jordan Hill-Lewis is to create this first world city at the southern tip of Africa, but then have a complete open border, and no real response to illegal land invasions, which ends up in a situation where just the rest of South Africa is going to come into Cape Town in their millions. We've already seen in the last 10 years the illegal settler population in Cape Town increase about 5-fold, from about 300,000 to 1.5 million. So, that's the situation we're now currently facing in Cape Town, and that will only get worse in the future. I mean, that Willem Petzler report, the details that they collected in there was, at the moment, about 4.3 billion rands in our budget in Cape Town is going to illegal settlements, and that's just the direct stuff. I mean, if you look at every other budget, you're going to see huge chunks going into the informal settlements. If you look at the security budget, which forms a massive part of Cape Town's expenditure, a huge chunk of that's going to be responsible for policing the increased crime that emerges from informal settlements. And it really just negatively impacts virtually every aspect of life for legacy residents of the Western Cape, with virtually no benefits in return. Yusuf, would you like to say anything on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it touches on pretty much every aspect of life here, and the ironic thing is that I think the DA naively believe, and they have for a long time, that they can just show what good governance is to the rest of South Africa, and then people will just adopt that, right? They'll be like, oh, wow, you guys really do govern so much better, and therefore we are going to vote for you. But it's a really, that idea has some very flawed premises, and that is firstly that people really decide their votes based on how things function. But in South Africa, that's definitely not the case. People primarily vote based on ethnic allegiances in the vast majority of cases, right? And then secondary on economic lines. So yeah, I fail to see what their grand strategy is. Are they trying to just get rid of those voices from the mainstream media that, oh yeah, you guys are racist and only are for people from Constantia or whatever? Because that is not working at all. People from the Daily Maverick, etc., still call the DA an elitist, white supremacist, borderline white supremacist party, right? Even though they are the most demographically diverse party out of anyone in South Africa, and they have been for years, right? So it doesn't matter how much of middle class and lower middle class and upper middle class people's tax money they spend, rate, which is effectively an indirect tax, right? They spend on trying to prove something, and I think this just underlies the DA's mindset in general, and a certain type of voter of the DA. I would say this thing, I think, comes very much from a guilt-based idea of one's role in South Africa, because the DA's leadership is mainly Anglo, and not to insult Anglo people, but I think there is this idea amongst Anglo people that oh, we are so terribly ashamed of the past, which is apartheid. And fair enough, apartheid was horrible and terrible, but it's almost as if there's nothing, every single demand must be met. So if 1.1 million people want to illegally invade land in the Western Cape and break the laws, well, that is just a consequence of the sins of the past, and we must bear it and face it. And that's the cost of living in Africa. And that mindset, I think, is something that is the undercurrent in the DA's thinking, primarily because it's an Anglo party, and I think also a lot of Anglo DA voters who form their core voting base, which is ironic because both of you are Anglo.
I think you picked up on something very good, Yusuf, but I'd like to have a more sort of cynical take on this. So what most people forget about the Democratic Alliance is that they actually aren't a new party. They claim to be founded in 2000, but this is this is a new skin on old wine. The truth is that they actually have organizational continuity with the South African Party, which was founded in 1896 in the Cape Colony. So they're a very old political party, and the traditional sort of political attitude that that sort of core Anglo base, it's not the majority of their voters by a long shot, but it is their most loyal sort of sector. It's the one they can take most for granted. The attitude that drives them is not specifically guilt. It's a combination of things that are actually in some ways contradictory, or at least paradoxical. So you've got their messaging is tailored in a certain way. So they do sell a Swart Gevaar message. This is true. I think we have to, if you want to sort of take this seriously, you have to actually take some of what the left-wing rags notice somewhat seriously. So they do notice that there is some sort of Swart Gevaar messaging. I mean, the entire sort of, what do you call it? What did they call it? The Doomsday Coalition. That's a Swart Gevaar message, right? So they do this, right? they tell you, be very afraid of black power. But on the other hand, they then sell you Rainbow Nation stuff. We are the real Rainbow Nation party. You understand? And then on the other hand, they point out their comparative, I should say, not absolute, lack of corruption and comparative competence. And I think, everyone has to admit that this is true. They are better than the ANC, a very low bar, but it's true. And so everyone realizes they're terrified of this. But the reality, as you point out, they do vote along ethnic lines, but the statistics are really revealing. So in no election has the ANC gotten more than 4% of the black vote. Not one election. Sorry, the DA. Yes, sorry. Yes. In no election has the DA gotten more than 4% of the black vote. Now, they boast that, okay, they've got 15% of their voters are black, but that's because black people are the vast majority of the country. And so they have that 4% is a lot of their little 21, 22%. And I mean, the thing is, if you run the numbers on Umgeni, where Chris Pappas has won KwaZulu-Natal, even that win, which looks so impressive because white people are, 22% of Umgeni, his victory can be entirely accounted for by an increase in voter turnout amongst the white population. And what's happened since MK has come back is that all of the new wards that he won voted MK in the national election, and a whole bunch of and all of the ANC wards fell to the MK as well. So what we should really sort of be realizing is that demographic change is the bigger threat, because black people, because of their different political culture and different political philosophy, do not desire the same things, and because of different levels of trust among the races, there is going to be a different allegiance. The ANC, MK, and EFF remain a supermajority at roughly 65% of the vote because they dominate black voters. The average black voter does not vote for any party that will abolish black economic empowerment and employment equity, or who will abolish or severely curtail the amount of public sector jobs or welfare that is handed out. This is very, very simple. There are two main points: racial privilege and free stuff. Those things, if you change them, black people will not vote for you. And the DA has tried to sell their sort of old-fashioned liberal sort of as centrist sort of philosophy to black people before by putting Musi Maimane in charge. He's a fairly hollow individual who's not very competent at politics, but because of his profile manages to attract some money from oligarchs and foreign investors and so on. But that didn't work because he was seen as a puppet. So they have this idea that he's sort of some Askari who's coming along to, mug for the cameras and whatever. And they sold very hard. They went very, very hard on the sort of woke doctrine, and they praised Winnie Mandela and all this, but it didn't work. Because ultimately,
there was even posters from those elections where they were endorsing BE on the posters. I remember an old councillor friend of mine had one in his garage.
Right. So I think it's not just the policies themselves. It's also, do we trust when they promise the policy that they're going to deliver it? Now, what's interesting is that recently they've started getting a little bit of the black vote nationally. Now, if you break down looking at the studies, whether it's by Gareth or Onson or the Braintrust Foundation or the IRR or whatever, the emergent pattern is that it's a very specific sector of the black population. It's sort of late 40s professionals in urban areas. So it's a very specific subset of black people who have become middle class and are dependent on the sort of stable suburban lifestyle that many white middle class people have become attached to. But it's also a very fragile allegiance because this has happened before. In fact, between almost every election, their polls whether you go by France Grenier's information or whether you go by, DA insiders who've talked about this before, between elections, they get this kind of a popularity bump with various sectors of the black population who are fed up with the ANC, and it's happened before. The question of whether it will stick or not is a different one. So now, I do think there are a couple of little flags worth looking at over here, which is that the DA
Sorry, Rob,
leadership...
could I just make a point in there as well, in regards to that polling fluctuation? Because
Yes.
my understanding as well is that when there's lower turnout elections, obviously that boosts the DA's prospects because white voter turnout is always universally far greater. And that might also play a role there, because I believe in the latest poll that came out, which had the DA on 30%, and they had the black DA support on about 18%. We had seen previous polls, before 2024, that had them on 32%. So we do see this.
So we're talking Western Cape or nationally?
Sorry?
Western Cape or nationally? Because that 18 sounds very big.
That was nationally. That was one of the latest polls that had the DA on 30% nationally. So was that really? I think it was the IRR's recent poll. Now, obviously, the
one that didn't control for qualification to vote or intention to vote.
Well, obviously that has a big role in it as well. And another big factor was that this was polled at the peak of the VAT debate. So obviously there was a lot of heightened emotions regarding what was taking place there. We probably had more attention on this budget than any other budget in history, and how it dominated the media headlines. But I think it also comes down to the reason why, especially leading up to an election, ANC support tends to recover is also that the ANC is able to mobilise their voters, and particularly as Neil De Beer says, that they do logistics on election day, so they're able to move so many people to the polling stations. So people who may not say in an opinion poll that they're going to vote ANC, but once they're basically driven to the polling station and given something and then told to vote, that probably does also add a substantial percentage to the ANC vote share as well.
It's different in the Cape, though, and this is a point that is sort of, how should I put it? It relies on a fair bit of speculation, and you have to look at sort of certain point level indicators, shall we say, for lack of a better word. But what's going on is, like, a lot of black people in the Western Cape refuse to vote at a higher rate than in many places in the country, right? It's not like the worst sort of voter absenteeism area, but it's pretty high. Now, when the IEC were canvassing in Khayelitsha during the last national election, what happened is that they were chased away. Just the IEC, not the ANC, the Independent Electoral Commission, just asking people to register to vote, were chased away by locals. Now, that indicates a very, very particular attitude. Now, we know that over the years, voter participation has cratered. The voting age population has kept increasing, and the number of voters has remained stagnant. But there are other little trends hidden amongst them. When you see voting intention controlled for age, what you will find is that the youngest voters lean left. The youngest voters lean further left than the general population. The oldest voters lean more ANC than any other party, right or left. And the very oldest, in the minorities, are the strongest DA supporters. Not so much amongst the...
Brenthurst was that. I think they had among over 65s, DA and the ANC were tied among over 65s. But that's obviously because 1 in 6 people over the age of 65, I believe, are white. And when you look under the age of 30, it's 1 in 32 are white. So obviously that does have a big impact on the DA's voter performance.
I mean, part of your problem is that, young professionals who have kids are leaving the country. So that's a big problem. I mean, someone who my new partner on the paper, someone who's going to be contributing a lot in days to come, is David Wilkinson, not to be confused with Richard Wilkinson, no relation. He pointed out something that is, when the site manages to come back online after all of our obnoxious bloody IT problems. One of the things that he pointed out was that this flight of younger white professionals has meant that if you look at almost any of our sort of medical professionals, any specialist that you care to look at is going to be like over 50 or even over 60. So, I mean, you know, we talk about NHI, but it's the medical system's probably facing a collapse due to an acute skills shortage as people age out of the market very, very soon. And the ability to retain this is going to rely on the ability to produce a higher standard of living than you can get overseas. Now, that would have been possible 10 to 15 years ago in the Cape, because in the Cape, property was cheap, cost of living was cheap, food was cheap, rent was cheap, rates were cheap, everything. None of that is true anymore. It's become incredibly violent. It's become incredibly crowded. The demographics have shifted. Public spaces, which used to be easy to enjoy, have become overcrowded and obnoxious and littered. And it changes the entire way that people experience the quality of life here. It's not what it used to be. And one of the biggest problems is that people are so mobile in the pursuit of the tiny amount of jobs that are left for minorities, and it's an increasingly narrow little quota, that nobody has the time to learn what a place was like before they arrived there. And so the ability to pay attention to and demand a higher standard from local governance officials is just dropping and dropping and dropping. If I look over here at Drakensberg, the number of people who have stayed long enough to actually pay attention to local politics, you can count them on one hand. It's really extraordinary. So they're also, I mean, look, the thing is, again, all of the activists, the people who actually focus on all of these like rates and local policy issues, they actually tend to be middle-aged or older. I mean, you know, Cape Town, I follow a couple of these little sites to keep up with what's going on. And I mean, one of the things that they pointed out with the recent rates increases is that all of the published formulas and the flyers that they've been punting have actually misreported the rates that are due when you actually get the bill. And Cape Town has like this little like rate calculator. And so, I mean, if I'm reading one of these little posts right now, there's a group called Stop Coct, Stop COCT, City of Cape Town. But it's run by a very sort of sharp woman who's pretty on the button with these things. But she says, someone who's contributing to this group said, you know, according to one of the flyers issued by the city, a property valued at 1.2 million, which is, I mean, that's not that in Cape Town, that's really not much anymore. With standard utility consumption, would incur a monthly bill of 3,655. But using the city's own online calculator, the actual amount is 5,510. So what they've done is, I mean, look, if you understand the media environment, what happens is that most, look, I've run this little paper of mine on a shoestring for a year and a half, you know, and if you need to try and keep up with these things, most of the time you're relying on public information, official statements, right? So you're going to go to the official statements first. You go, that's the figure, that'll do. I mean, how much time do you have in the day to go and comb through this? If I want to do an investigative piece, it can take me up to a month to put together, and then it might not even pan out. I mean, I just handled 2 stories, one of which is going to involve me going and canvassing people in an informal settlement if I want to finish it, and the other one is I literally cannot get hold of the documents that can confirm or deny it. So this kind of problem means that people are going to rely on official sources. So the DA gets to publish, okay, well, this is actually what you're going to be paying. That's what you're going to be paying, whatever. And the residents find out down the line, no, actually it's higher than that by an additional 30%. And this is fairly common. I mean, how many of you know that the city of Cape Town are preparing to introduce dog licenses? Right, because they piloted the project in Hessequa. And so then you get local municipal officials who want to cause trouble for you coming by your house and threatening to euthanize your dogs. Or, I mean, it's absurd. I mean, and Hessequa is a great example of how the DA managed to get away with things. They are fantastically professional in their public relations stuff. Now, I ran a piece in August last year, talking about a particular scandal in which there was corruption involved with the traffic department, in which 20 million rands was stolen. They were double charging residents for traffic fines that they'd paid. So when the traffic officers found out that the people had already paid the fines, but were still being charged for them, they blew the whistle, and then the entire department gets fired. So then the guy running the department is a guy called Albert de Klerk, and he tells them, I'm gonna get rid of you if you don't tell me who blew the whistle. And I know that some of you are breadwinners, so you can actually get in a lot of hot water, and I can hold this over your head. But and then he fired them all anyway. The entire traffic officer corps, right, which was 10 people anyway, to cover a really large area. What they'd done is they'd outsourced both the front and back end of the whole system to a company called Syntel, and then a lower level employee of Syntel got involved in this little scheme, allegedly with the prosecutor's office. But that's a long story. My point is, you've got this guy Albert de Klerk, right? So why does he think that he's immune? Why does he think he can do this kind of stuff? Well, because it's happened before. He got caught with a cash for jobs scandal in Midvaal. So then he's going to be investigated. Just before there's the council vote on the investigation, he quietly resigns, and the ANC central office relocates him to Langeberg. Langeberg hears about the fact that he's actually potentially corrupt, and they said they don't want him. So they quietly move him to Hessequa, where no one knows anything, and no one's any the wiser. And so he can confidently tell the traffic officers, "I'm immune from consequences. They can't. I'm looked after. Don't think you can do anything to me." This is the kind of behavior you get in the DA. They're perfectly comfortable doing all kinds of shenanigans because they know they're very good at covering it up. I mean, you've got people, whether it's Memory Boyson or Eleanor Bospies or what's the other character's name? Conrad Poor from my own district. If they get caught with corruption, they resign before the investigation occurs. No one looks into them, and then they get promoted to Parliament.
Well, Conrad didn't resign, did he? He had to be removed in a motion of no confidence, which even DA councillors voted for. So I don't think we've had any more updates from that case, have we?
That was a very interesting smochel, because he didn't want to go. And they didn't want him to hang around long enough to get in trouble. So they organized a backroom deal with the local Vryheids from Plus branch to have him voted out, because they couldn't command enough votes in their own party. So they got rid of him before he could be investigated. And then they promoted him to Parliament. Interesting move, hey? Very fascinating.
Yeah, I want to go back to a point you made earlier on, though, in your in the discussion, which was your point about the quality of life, though, in many Western Cape municipalities, and how certainly, at least from a middle class perspective, it's deteriorated over the years and costs have gone up. And I think actually that is something that not enough people are talking about. But we run a really big danger here in the Western Cape of being a victim of our own success. Because yes, on one hand, we do have all these, illegal land invaders coming in. At the same time, we do have a lot of more middle-class people from the rest of South Africa coming down to the Cape. But as soon as Cape Town and the Western Cape becomes less attractive than moving abroad, and for many people it is already more attractive to move abroad, and obviously the employment equity, enhances that further, then you start to cut off those higher income people, the people who actually pay the rates coming into Cape Town, but the number of people coming in from lower income backgrounds and legally settling, that will increase. Sorry?
It's worse than that. They're not just not moving to the Western Cape. The spillover is now going to the western part of the Eastern Cape. So you're getting some of the wealthier people rocking up in like Kenton-on-Sea and that whole sort of Albany area. And you're getting people coming down to. Then you're getting a huge bunch of developments near. What's his name? PE. So I mean, like places that would no one would have thought to sort of semigrate to from Johannesburg are now sort of pushing up huge property developments. Because, I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to come to Cape Town, you're going to pay such an impossible fee to own a house. It's becoming that they can't attract this anymore because there's simply not enough land to develop the property. And if you want to develop the property, you have to deal with the gangs. And the gangs have cornered the construction sector. You have to do business deals with them in order to actually function. And I have some sympathy with people like Malusi Boy, who actually did deals with the 28 in order to build local housing projects, because how else are you going to get it done? On the other hand, briefcases of cash he allegedly accepted from them this is, the council knew about this for 4 years. I mean, this was brought up by Fadiel Adams back in 2019, reported to police, city officials, everyone, published in the newspapers. Nobody looked into it. And, the whole DA pretends when this guy gets caught, oh dear, I'm so, I had no idea. And but only when the police actually enter his office. I mean, look, I can't say anything about JP Smith. I really hope it's not true, because I really liked what he was doing for public security. But I can easily actually believe it, that the same thing's happening with him. And the problem is that this is a mess of their own making. They've got, I mean, if you wanted to deal with organized crime and its relationship with the state, the premier of the province has powers of investigation through setting up a special commission. He could do that into any systemic problem in the province, and he would have the same power as any police commissioner. But he doesn't do it. He doesn't do it.
Let's use that as a point to connect on, because, I mean, this goes, I mean, the problem of land invasions in the Western Cape, you can actually directly tie to a lot of the inaction that we've seen from the Democratic Alliance, particularly the provincial government. So in 2022, well, let's give some more background. So one of the major issues we're facing when it comes to legal land invasions emanates from the PI Act, particularly how that criminalizes landowners and decriminalizes land invaders once someone sets up their property. And a big issue of that is in regards to housing. So how
that and the
housing
ESTA Act. That and the ESTA, you got to remember, there's also the ESTA Act, which is the similar, but it's also for it's for rural areas. So they've got two of them. What I find really peculiar is that if you've actually read the Act, the PI Act exclusively refers to tenants. And what's happened by some absolutely bizarre twist of fate is that our legal system treats land invaders as if they're tenants. The actual text of the bill does not allow you, if you're sitting on that land, to do what you're doing. You're not a tenant. It's not legal. The actual text of the bill contradicts it. However, someone is High Court judges have shoehorned in the right to housing from the Constitution into the reading of the bill, so that it doesn't really matter what the bill says. Now it's like, well, anyone can take any property they want, and it's rightfully theirs if they've hung about long enough. And that amount of time is very short.
Yeah, look, and the big issue that the Referendum Party's illegal settlements bill tries to seek is that definition of housing, because obviously there is a constitutional right there not to be, evicted from your housing. But at the same time, if you never had a legal right to be on that land in the first place, it's maybe not. It's maybe there are obviously different contexts here. So if you previously owned the land and then you sold it and then you don't want to leave, that's one case. But if you went onto a piece of land, you set up a structure, and you claim that's your house. It isn't your house. You never had the legal right to be there. So that's a major issue that the Referendum Party's illegal settlements bill seeks to deal with, is the definition of housing. Because once you've dealt with that definition, then the ability to evict becomes easier. But the big problem here was the DA came up with their own national amendment bill to the PI Act, and I believe it was 2022, which seek to deal with a number of issues from that piece of legislation. And of course, because it's the National Parliament, it didn't go anywhere, because this is quite a convenient piece of legislation for ANC. But the thing about housing is that it's a concurrent power between national government and provincial government. So the DA, rather than wasting all this time to make a song and dance about a national piece of legislation, you could have done that at the provincial level. You could have gotten a provincial bill done, you could have gotten your objectives done at the provincial level, and then if you wanted to, down the line, look at the national level, but you could have started at provincial, you could have put protections in place for the province, and the DA did not do that. So all this time they keep on saying, oh, it's a case of there's nothing we can do. They can do things. They've got the provincial parliament where they can pass their own laws. Their inaction is responsible for this problem we're facing.
Yeah, this speaks to something that really frustrates me with the DA's messaging. And I mean, Robert, you've mentioned how effective their messaging is in general, and I must say they're a well-oiled machine. But whenever something goes slightly wrong, or they tend to blame the national government. Oh yeah, but this is something a national agency. But from just like, for example, these provincial laws, etc., they aren't willing to like take bold steps in the province in general, and have this very wishy-washy, like let's test the waters type attitude towards dealing with problems. But the problem is like we need drastic action now. Like life is getting fundamentally worse. Like if South Africa was any other country in the world, like Brazil or whatever, people would be up in arms by how extremely ineffective and how like backwards things are going. But because of
Brazil is an incredibly interesting example for you to use, because I mean, where I found out that they started taking the soft incentivized approach to land invasions as early as they did was from an article written by Leon Schreiber praising this, of course, and a while ago, I think sometime last year, I had a little dive into what he was busy with before he became parachuted into being Minister of Department. And he's always just been an academic and a researcher. He has no previous administrative sort of skills. Not that he's not intelligent enough to do it or disciplined enough to do it. I think he's doing okay, all things considered. But if you look at what he's actually written, one of his, I think it was his PhD thesis, although I stand to be corrected, he wrote about how the ideal model for South Africa is Lula da Silva's Brazil. And one of the key points that he picks up on is that under Lula's Brazil, they were very, very keen on land tenure. And I mean, this is interesting because one of the things that Lula has been pushing is allowing people who invade land to stay where they are. I mean, aside from the fact that he's one of the most viciously corrupt politicians in any country, and has one of the most aggressive sort of welfare handout systems there is. They're fortunate in that most of this behavior is contained to one province in the northeast, whereas in South Africa, it's like most of the country has this particular sort of balance, except for, well, for the most part, the Western Cape. And Schreiber's idea is that we need to actually run the society with universal basic income, very, very generous handouts, no real enforcement of, border security or anything like that. I mean, his approach to border security is very interesting because the policies that he likes are no visas for anyone from China or India, or if he had his way anywhere else. But everyone gives their biometric information to Home Affairs so they can track you through a public-private partnership with the banking cartel that runs the country. So there's like it's a very, very interesting combination of things. So your point about Brazil and outcry, Brazil's a country where they do have problems with land invasions already, similar to us. Obviously not as severe, but it becomes part of it becomes part of the machine. If you're a populist party that appeals to the lower ends, this is a quick way to win points. And the DA seems to think that they can win points with poorer voters by handing them free stuff and not enforcing the law on them. And I mean, this is very worrisome. This can be very, very corrosive.
Well, of course, you can only liquidate, Cape Town's assets so far, and the assets of the middle class is moving to Cape Town. And that goes back to the point, and I want to start wrapping this up, but just talking about what the Referendum Party is going to be doing going forward, because a number of the issues we've touched on so far, we've got campaigns surrounding. But yeah, I mean, going back to the point, as the quality of life in Cape Town decreases, the number of people with money wanting to come to Cape Town will decrease. The capital we'll have to give free stuff to people from lower income communities coming to Cape Town will decrease. And that will just worsen things across the city, across the board, because eventually you're going to end up in a situation where you can't keep up with your commitments. And who knows what the outcome of that situation will be. But then, of course, a big driver of people preferring to move abroad rather than stay in Cape Town is, of course, we've now seen these new employment equity rules, where, I mean, in many professions for entry positions, white males are limited to less than 5% of the jobs. And I mean, you've always got to be careful with, the white genocide narrative that's often spoken about. But I think you can make a very, very strong argument that these policies of race-based policy are pushing us to ethnocide, where you try and remove a particular minority group or a particular community out of the country. And that's the direct consequences of this legislation. Now, the Referendum Party has got a non-racialism bill that we're presenting. It's going to put pressure on the parties in the GNU. I see the DA has taken some action recently on the Employment Equity Act, but this will be a concrete piece of legislation that seeks to end race-based policy in its entirety, that the Referendum Party will be presenting through the committee process to Parliament, and will put the parties on record in Parliament whether they're actually prepared to stand for ending race-based policy in its entirety in South Africa. Because again, that's the problem with the DA. On one hand, they'll take the Employment Equity Act to court, yet in a lot of their municipalities, even when it's not necessary, they still engage in enacting race-based policy. So that's the big irony of the DA once again. But then, of course, when it comes to the legal land invasions, which is the second big issue that we're talking about, we've got our legal settlements bill. I'll put in the description a link to that bill after this podcast. And that bill will empower us to take action against these illegal settlements. And if there's one thing that you just need to take away from this bill, the big turnaround that would come from it is that by redefining what a home means and what housing is, if you never had a right to be on that piece of land, the structure you've got there isn't your home. And if it's not your home, then it will be far easier to remove people who are legally settled. So that's the action the Referendum Party is going to take. We'll go through the same process to get this bill presented to the Western Cape Parliament. And then once again, the DA will be put under pressure to take action on illegal land invasion. So even though we're not in a position, ideally, if we had won seats at the last election, we'd be able to present these bills ourselves. And I had many ideas of bills to present to increase autonomy if we had been elected. But we've got these avenues available to us now. We're going to use them, and we're going to try and use this to change the political environment in the Western Cape. So I just want to thank Rob and Yusuf for joining me tonight for this podcast. Guys, in the last 2 minutes, would you like to have anything to say?
Well, just this land invasion story is the rate hikes in general. Another aspect of life effectively living. And I mean, if we don't take action, I don't know what people expect. Do they expect it's magic? I feel like people just think these things are just magically going to turn around and become better. But in reality, we're just creating incentives and structures that are going to create more poverty and more suffering in the long run. So it's incredibly frustrating, and I'm glad, the Referendum Party, we are doing something to make a difference. But people really need to wake up because life is otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, there's that saying, isn't it? The cavalry isn't coming. We are the cavalry. The DA is not going to save us. None of the parties in the GNU are going to save us on this issue. It's up to the citizens now, and it's up to groups like the Referendum Party, like AfriForum, like the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, to do everything we can as political parties, civil society groups, to take action to protect our interests. So, to everyone who joined us tonight, if you'd like to get involved in the Referendum Party, we're trying to get branches set up all across the province in order to contest by-elections, the 2026 local elections, because if we can, create beachheads, in the councils, that puts us in a very strong position for the 2029 elections. So if you'd like to join us, go to referendumparty.org/join. It's £100 a year, and you can be part of something that's really going to bring change to the Western Cape. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Well, that was abrupt.